In March of 1918, a massive United States Navy ship sailed into the Atlantic Ocean with 309 people on board, and then it simply ceased to exist. No wreckage washed ashore, no oil rose to the surface, no body was ever recovered, no radio call for help reached any other vessel. A 540-foot warship, longer than a city block, evaporated from the face of the planet, and more than a century later, the Navy still cannot tell you where she went down. This is the story of the USS Cyclops, the largest unexplained loss of life in American naval history outside of combat, and the reasons her grave has stayed hidden are stranger than most people realize. People did look for her. The search began the moment she failed to arrive in port, with vessels combing the route for weeks. The Navy opened a formal inquiry. Decades later, the famous adventure novelist Clive Cussler, a man who personally located dozens of historic wrecks, poured his own funds into a hunt for the Cyclops in the early 1980s and walked away with nothing. Modern sonar sweeps using equipment that did not exist in his lifetime have also returned blank. One of the biggest ships in the wartime fleet has refused to be found, and there are very specific reasons for that, reasons tied directly to how she most likely died. The Cyclops was a Proteus-class collier, a heavy cargo carrier built to haul coal and supplies for warships at sea. She was launched out of Philadelphia in 1910, and for 7 years she ran fuel routes across the Atlantic and the Caribbean. When the United States entered the First World War in 1917, she was pulled into formal naval service. In January of 1918, she steamed out of Norfolk, Virginia, with nearly 10,000 tons of coal destined for the Navy squadron stationed in Rio de Janeiro. She arrived on the 28th, dropped her load, and was assigned a new cargo for the trip home: 11,000 tons of manganese ore, a critical material for making steel and ammunition during the war. That is where the warning signs began. 2 serious problems were flagged before she ever left South America. The first was the load itself. The Cyclops was sitting too low in the water, well past the safety line painted on her hull. The second was mechanical. One of her 2 engines had a cracked cylinder and was completely dead. A survey board examined the ship and recommended she limp back home for repairs, rather than attempt a full ocean crossing in that state. The recommendation was filed. The captain ignored it. The Cyclops put to sea anyway. She made one last unscheduled stop in Barbados on the 3rd of March, and even there, port officials wrote down that she looked dangerously overloaded. She took on a few supplies, departed the next morning, and pointed her bow north toward Baltimore. Her expected arrival was the 13th. The final transmission anyone ever received from her was a short, ordinary weather note saying conditions were fair. Then there was nothing. When she missed her arrival date, the Navy started asking questions. Search vessels were dispatched along the route between Barbados and Baltimore. Other ships in the region were contacted by radio. Not one had spotted her. The ocean held no debris, no slick of fuel, no floating wreckage, no remains of the crew. By June of that year, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, a man named Franklin D. Roosevelt, who would later sit in the Oval Office, signed the formal declaration that the ship and every soul aboard her were lost. So what actually happened to her? There are a handful of theories, and walking through them reveals exactly why nobody can locate the wreck. The first idea was a German submarine attack. The Cyclops vanished during wartime. U-boats were active across the Atlantic, and her cargo was valuable. But after the war ended and German naval logs were released, researchers found no record of any U-boat ever encountering her. The Germans openly took credit for many sinkings. The Cyclops was never on that list. Almost no historian still takes the submarine theory seriously. The second theory is the one most experts now favor, and it is grim. Structural failure. The ship was overloaded, running on a single engine, and packed with 11,000 tons of dense metallic ore. An officer who had previously served aboard her later argued that the ore was likely stacked only in the central holds, rather than spread evenly across her length. That kind of loading puts catastrophic stress on the middle of a hull. In rough seas, a ship in that condition can break clean in half and slip beneath the waves in a matter of minutes, far too quickly to send a distress call, launch a single lifeboat, or leave anything behind for searchers to find. That alone could explain why the surface of the ocean stayed empty. There is hard evidence supporting this idea, and this is where the story gets unsettling. The Cyclops had two sister ships, vessels of the exact same design called the Proteus and the Nereus. Both were eventually sold off for civilian use, and both were converted to carry heavy metal ore, the same kind of cargo their sister had been hauling on her last voyage. The Proteus disappeared in the Atlantic in November of 1941. The Nereus disappeared in the Atlantic just 1 month later, in December of 1941. 3 ships of identical construction, all carrying dense ore, all gone without a trace. Speaking honestly, when I came across that detail, I went back and verified it twice, because the pattern is hard to accept. The third theory revolves around the captain himself, Lieutenant Commander George Worley. In the months leading up to the final voyage, his own crew filed complaints accusing him of unstable behavior and poor judgment. There were even reports of a small mutiny aboard the ship. Worley was born in Germany, and in the heated atmosphere of wartime America, that fact led some to suggest he might have surrendered the ship to enemy forces. The Navy investigated and cleared him. Still, the simple fact that he chose to sail an overloaded vessel with a broken engine across the open Atlantic is hard to defend. If you have made it this far, the next part is where the search itself goes cold. If you are finding this story as strange as I do, take a second to subscribe to the channel, because I cover lost ships, missing aircraft, and unsolved disappearances like this one every week, and I have a lot more coming. Now, back to the ocean. There is also the famous Bermuda Triangle angle. The Cyclops vanished inside the rough boundary of Bermuda, Miami, and Puerto Rico, the same patch of water that would later earn that infamous nickname. To be clear, the most credible explanation here is not anything supernatural. It is a heavy ship breaking apart in heavy weather, but the timing matters. Records show that a serious storm tore through the area between Cape Hatteras and Cape Charles on the 9th and 10th of March 1918, exactly the window in which the Cyclops would have been passing through. An overloaded ship running on one engine, possibly carrying badly stacked cargo, would have been in mortal danger in those seas. So the question becomes, why has she still never been located? Modern technology has pulled wrecks out of far more difficult places. The USS Indianapolis sat on the seabed undiscovered for 72 years before being found in 2017. The Bismarck was located 48 years after her sinking. So why not the Cyclops? The honest answer is that no one knows where to point the equipment. The Indianapolis was eventually discovered because a researcher dug up an old log entry from a passing vessel that placed her in a specific spot only 11 hours before she sank, narrowing the search dramatically. The Cyclops has nothing like that. She sent no distress call with coordinates. She was somewhere on hundreds of miles of open ocean between Barbados and Baltimore, and there is no reliable record of where along that line she went under. There was one tantalizing lead. In 1968, a Navy diver named Dean Hawes descended on a large, unidentified wreck off the coast of Virginia. The structure matched the Cyclops with eerie precision, including a bridge mounted on steel stilts above the deck and long loading arms running along the hull. Hawes was certain he had found her. But when the Navy returned to those exact coordinates, the wreck could not be relocated. Hawes died not long after, and that lead was never properly followed up. The most likely truth is the simplest and the saddest. The Cyclops broke apart in a storm and went down so fast that nothing made it back to the surface. She is almost certainly resting somewhere on the floor of the Atlantic between Virginia and Barbados, perhaps shattered into pieces, perhaps buried under a century of sediment, perhaps in water deeper than any search has reached. As one researcher put it, hunting for a wreck without a known location is like searching the dark side of the moon. The Navy's official position has not changed in over 100 years. The cause of the loss is unknown. 309 people are still down there in the dark, and no one alive can tell you where.